A gray building stood quietly in the deserted clearing. Lucien's footsteps crunched lightly on the snow as he walked towards the previous site of the Bioscience Research Center. The moonlight was as pale as the snow. He pushed open the shabby gate and walked straight through. Once inside, he heard a small creak and saw Artemis, who was standing in the middle of the hall.
You're here.
Lucien nodded, walked slowly to the window lattice, and gazed at the snowfield outside the window. The cold moonlight shone in on him, which made him look terribly cold, with no trace of warmth. Artemis was the first to break the silence.
The previous press conference was still too risky.
Lucien didn't answer. He stood motionless in front of the window. Seemingly used to his indifference, Artemis took a few steps forward and tried another approach.
What should we do next? I heard that many people are already...
I know.
Lucien interrupted her, his voice like a piercing cold wind.
We only need to focus on what matters.
Okay. I see.
After a moment's thought, Artemis agreed. The dilapidated building was silent again. Passing clouds blocked the only moonlight, and even snow appeared blurry against the dark night. The two figures standing by the window were like black ghosts. Lucien finally withdrew his gaze.
Maybe a new direction will present itself.
A new direction. You mean...
Before Artemis could finish, a small noise drew her attention. Turning back sharply, Artemis spotted a figure lurking nearby. In the blink of an eye, gray mist lunged forward, and she suddenly appeared next to the intruder, deftly capturing him. After disarming him, she pressed him to the ground. She was like a cheetah, mingling in the darkness with her slightly narrowed eyes and tight black leather jacket. The suppressed man moaned, and muttering to himself, he struggled to reach the gun in front of him. Just then, a pair of black leather shoes appeared before him. The clouds dispersed, and the moonlight outlined Lucien's figure. He looked down at the man at his feet and chuckled, his features still shrouded in darkness.
I happen to have some questions for you.
Artemis paused, her eyes slightly widened.
Ares, did you do this on purpose?
Lucien said nothing. He bent down slightly, his cold gaze meeting the man's shocked eyes.
I think we're looking for the same thing. How about telling me everything you know?
Evil! You're all horrible and deserve to die!
The man on the ground once again tried to reach for the weapon. His fingertips barely touched it, but Artemis got to it first. She took one glance at the gun and tossed it aside. She looked at the murmuring man with contempt and an imperceptible perplexity.
How would they know about all this?
It's not unexpected.
In comparison, Lucien appeared calm and collected. He had been expecting the man and understood full well the intelligence he would bring.
Everyone has, more or less.
Before he could finish, the man on the ground suddenly sprang up and rushed straight towards Lucien. He was fast, and his clenched fist nearly touched Lucien's nose. Suddenly, a screech echoed throughout the research center. Lucien didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just glanced at the man, who was once again subdued by Artemis. Unamused, he looked away and walked back to the window. As he touched the cold window frame, he heard a flurry of footsteps entering the door. Something fell to the ground with a thud.
Who's there?
Artemis responded swiftly. Lucien also turned toward the door, only for his eyes to behold a bizarre flash of color. Eyes wide open, helplessly stood next to the half-closed door. She looked at the three people in front of her, and finally settled on Lucien's face. It's her. A moan broke the brief silence, interrupting Lucien's bewilderment. Artemis stunned the man pressed to the ground, then turned her attention to the girl by the door. Gray mist suddenly emerged from nowhere and pounced on the girl like a net.
Stop.
There was an unexpected urgency in his cold voice. Artemis immediately stopped, and the gray mist that was about to engulf the girl vanished. The girl appeared to be terrified, almost collapsing on the doorpost behind her. She looked up frantically, her nervous eyes still fixed on Lucien. Lucien didn't look at her, and coldly said,
I'll handle it.
As snow continued to fall, the pure white snowflakes and the pitch-black night formed a sharp contrast. Lucien approached the girl. Half of his figure fell into darkness, and the other half reflected the bright snow.
You know more than I would have guessed.
Although he was smiling, there was a cold ruthlessness in his eyes that was undisguisable.
Since the last time we've met, I realized that. What makes you sure that I won't hurt you?
Lucien drew very close to the girl, but there was no warmth and no ambiguity in his intention. Lucien's palm enveloped the girl's neck, and he could feel her tremble slightly. She appeared flustered as he tightened his grasp around her slender neck. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she gasped for air as she struggled. Lucien watched as a teardrop slid down her wrinkled nose, her trembling lips, all the way to her slightly raised chin. Her pale fingers wrapped around the back of his hand, quivering like butterfly wings. Is it not enough? As the teardrop streaked down her face, Lucien lowered his eyes and strangled the girl even harder. Finally, the girl closed her eyes, and the surrounding air suddenly changed. Transparent ripples spread outwards, emitting a golden light. Lucien released his grasp. The girl staggered and took a few steps back, wheezing and coughing. Lucien's cruel voice ruthlessly confirmed her fate.
You were the Black Swan Queen.
The surrounding air froze, and Lucien could not move his arm as a strong force entangled it like a vine. A hint of surprise flashed across Lucien's face, and then he smiled. Of course he knew where this power came from.
I didn't think you could get that far.
I didn't know I was able to until today.
The girl clenched her fist stubbornly, but her hoarse voice betrayed her fear and apprehension.
Ares, I'll prove everything you've done with them was wrong.
As the morning light crept into the research center, Lucien watched the girl stumble out. He closed his eyes until her footsteps could be heard no more. Wrong. Easily breaking loose from the girl's restraints, Lucien chuckled and walked to the window. The fiery red figure drifted away in the daylight, and he suddenly remembered the first time he met the girl. She was like a butterfly fluttering before his eyes, stirring up buried emotions like waves. Because of her sudden appearance, Lucien began to re-examine certain matters, including information related to the research center, Black Swan's plans, and the existence of the Queen. 17 years ago, leaked data from Ultima Bioresearch revealed that a carrier of a special gene participated in a research experiment. Within the Black Swan Collective, the girl with the special gene was known as the Queen. Finding the Queen was equivalent to discovering the key to evolution, and the mere idea of it drove those sharing the same goal to the brink of insanity. However, soon after, Ultima Bioresearch unexpectedly announced that these so-called leakages were maliciously forged. Although no one could tell whether the rumors were true or false, the search for the Queen never ceased. 17 years had passed since then, yet no one had found any trace of the Queen. Her existence was gradually regarded as a myth, and Black Swan had also begun to look into new plans for evolution. As one of the most important participants of the new plan, Lucien clearly understood what the Queen's appearance meant. First and foremost, it meant a shortcut. Lucien blinked. His world reverted back into darkness and silence, except for the stroke of vivid color that remained in his heart.
The Pioneer's creation. I hope you're worth my anticipation.
His hand on one side trembled involuntarily, but was quickly suppressed.
It won't be long.
He whispered, not knowing if his words were meant for himself or someone else. That night, Lucien had a rare dream. The camphor tree, the blood rain, and the laboratory, all in black and white. The alternating images flashed through like an old TV, repeatedly playing stories long buried. It was very clear to Lucien that those stories were his memories. He strolled along memory lane, examining the stories embedded in the frame, until a distinctive painting appeared before him. In this black and white world, only the background of the painting was in color. In it was a girl with a ponytail, walking towards a dazzling white light. Lucien fixed his eyes on her for a long time, until the fiery red of the maple leaves engulfed her. She was extinguished, and the only color was left in the ashes. Then, she stepped out of the fiery red. The beautiful colors on her faded, and were crushed into powder that scattered into the wind, transforming into the faint scent of gardenia. Following the fragrance, Lucien walked into the painting. The painting collapsed the moment he stepped into it. The girl looked up and ran in the opposite direction. Who is that? Is that her? Lucien tried hard to remember, but his mind was foggy. He knew that he had never seen this person before, yet the figure was so intimately familiar. His heartbeat became a bit abnormal. He lowered his eyes and wanted to turn away, but the world suddenly twisted and changed right in front of him. Old memories flashed across his mind, and bitterness began to spread to the tip of his tongue. After some time, Lucien finally felt that he had regained his consciousness. He opened his eyes and found that the ceiling had become much higher, and the complicated picture frame appeared even larger. He was shocked to find that he had gone back to his childhood. The scarf around his neck was bright red, like the figure that slowly disappeared into the firelight. He couldn't help but reach out to that figure. Lucien woke up. There was a low gasp in the dark room, and he raised his hands to cover his eyes. The dark space seemed to have no boundaries, and only the faint twinkling of starlight dotted the darkness. Lucien looked at the girl lying quietly in front of him. Light and shadow fell on her eyelashes, then scattered elsewhere. The thick darkness enveloped the room. The stifling atmosphere even affected the girl's dream, and her breathing became a bit heavy and sporadic. She seemed to be resisting something. Her lips moved slightly, and her clenched fists waved around unconsciously. That's... Slightly squinting, Lucien moved closer, and he finally saw what was in the girl's hand. It was a small, black, pyramid-shaped box. The girl grasped it tightly, and it took Lucien some effort to loosen her grip. Under the faint light, he carefully examined the black box, squeezed it tightly in his hand. At last, murmur interrupted Lucien's thoughts, and he looked over at the girl. Her brows were furrowed, and she was trembling uncontrollably. She seemed to have fallen into a deeper nightmare. Shivering, she was like a falling autumn leaf. He suddenly remembered the previous dream. At the end of the scene in the painting, the distant figure turned back, and his wide-eyed young self allowed the girl to flutter into his world. Lucien reached out, and for a moment he wanted to calm the girl of her fear and agitation. But in the end, he lightly touched her brow and quickly withdrew his hand. However, as if she had felt the brief warmth of his touch, the girl's eyelashes fluttered, and she finally stopped frowning. He tightened his grasp on the black box. Tracing the girl's features with his eyes, Lucien thought to himself, perhaps the long-awaited outcome may come sooner than expected. It can finally begin.